Yeah, so we actually see porn use when it becomes addictive and problematic. It actually impacts their relationship satisfaction and sexual satisfaction.
Hello, and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast, where you can learn powerful techniques to change the way you feel. I am your host, Dr. Rhonda Borowski, and joining me here in the Murrieta studio is Dr. David Burns. Dr. Burns is a pioneer in the development of cognitive behavioral therapy and the creator of the new teen therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 30 languages. His latest book, Feeling Great, contains powerful new techniques that make rapid recovery possible for many people struggling with depression and anxiety. Dr. Burns is currently an emeritus adjunct professor of clinical psychiatry at Stanford University School of Medicine.
Hello, Rhonda.
Hello, David, and welcome everyone who's listening. This is the Feeling Good podcast, and we're at episode 437. We are so lucky today because we have Truong with us. She's a level 5 team CBT therapist and trainer based out of Oklahoma. She's a licensed professional counselor, but she's here today because we're going to be talking about porn addiction. And Tyann also has a licensed alcohol and drug counselor. She also is a licensed alcohol and drug counselor. So welcome, Tyann.
Hi, Rhonda. Hi, Dr.
Hi,
Burns. I'm
Diane.
so grateful to be here to come
I'm
back to connect.
excited that you're on the podcast because every time you are, you've given such dynamic and powerful and helpful presentations. And I'm sure this one will be no different, but much more exciting in a way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I thought I would start off by reading a pretty heartfelt endorsement. And Tyann, whenever you're on, I feel so much warmth and heart connection that I thought this would be a good podcast to read. And this is from Maggie. And she wrote, "Dear Dr. Burns and Dr. Borowski, I hope this message finds you both well. I recently listened to the podcast episode where my case was featured. It was an Ask David episode. And I believe her question was featured. It was episode 425. And she wrote to us about it. I wanted to take a moment to express my heartfelt gratitude. Dr. Burns, your insights helped me realize something profound, that I need to be kinder to my mother, especially as she ages and becomes more challenging for me to navigate emotionally. This has been such an eye-opening and transformative realization. It's one that I carry with me daily. And Rhonda, your input into the discussion was equally impactful. Your thoughtful perspective added depth and clarity to the conversation, and I felt truly seen and understood through your contributions. I find myself reflecting on the importance of family, forgiveness, and love. I feel touched and inspired by the kindness and care you both bring to your work, and I'm more motivated than ever to approach my relationship with my mother with greater patience and compassion. Thank you for your incredible work and for sharing your wisdom so generously. You've made a real difference in my life, and I'm so grateful for the timing of this lesson as my mom and I enter this tender stage of life together. Warm regards, Maggie."
Well, thank you so much, Maggie, for that beautiful note, and I'm thrilled that you're enjoying and experiencing a transformation in your relationship with your mother, particularly at this time of her aging, and who knows how much longer she has to live, or any of us have to live, and to be able to spend that time in love and warmth and closeness rather than frustration and irritation is a beautiful gift for sure. And when we give you that gift, you're giving that gift to us as well. So thank you, Maggie. It's wonderful getting your email in your kind words.
So, Tyann, you're here today in your capacity as a team therapist, but also as a licensed alcohol and drug counselor. And you have a lot of expertise in addictions. And we decided we were talking about several different types of addictions you could talk about. And you gave the option and of talking about porn addiction. And David and I are really excited about that. I don't think we've talked about that on the podcast yet. So how would you like to begin?
Yeah, I'm just really excited to be here to share about porn addiction because, as I shared with Rhonda, I've been a licensed alcohol and drug counselor since 2010. And to keep up our license, we need to get continuing education in addictions. And so I just started getting exposure through sex addiction, attending a training from Dr. Patrick Carnes. So he has the certification program for certified sex addiction therapist. But I wasn't as interested in it as I was just really drawn to team, and I loved all of our tools and the empathy that it provides. And as I was learning team, and then I'm working with couples, even in the past a year, I've seen more just porn addiction come up among the couples that I'm working with. And so that was when I started to just read a lot more. So I've had some training, attending Patrick Carnes's training, but just reading through it and actually applying team and our habits and addictions tools I found to be just really effective. More often than not, I'm working with the couple and the wife is complaining, feeling betrayed, feeling hurt by their partner. Their partner says they'll stop and then they'll continue use of porn. And so as I'm working with the couple and I'm aware of this, it's a topic that's quite taboo. The guys usually feel a lot of shame around it. And as I'm reading and researching, I'm just learning a lot more about porn and its effects. And I just want to first start with a disclaimer that there's no moral judgment here in terms of porn use, and it can be a healthy and fun part for some people's sex lives. I just want to share a lot of the information that I'm learning and what I'm applying in case it has become a real serious problem for people. So just wanting to share the symptoms, what are the signs of when it's become an addiction and how it can really impact a relationship. And then ultimately share how I've applied a lot of Dr. Burns's habits and addictions tools to really help just these people who are suffering and feeling like they can't stop even though they really wanted to.
Awesome. We're all ears. Keep talking and tell us about the symptoms and how it impacts and how you might approach working with this problem if you're working with a couple or with an individual for that matter.
Yeah, so if I'm working with a couple and I realize this is a huge problem in the relationship, I'll actually do individual therapy to just work with the person with the porn addiction. And I wonder if it's helpful for us to start with some stats, just from
Sure.
some of my
Yeah.
trainings and what I've learned. So what we're seeing is there's just a great rise in porn use since 2006 when high-speed internet became available. So through studies and polls, this one was from Australia, but they believe it's very similar in the US. In a 2017 poll in Australia of youths aged 15 to 29, 100% of young men have used porn and 82% of women. And so it's not just now like a male dominated issue. 82% of young women have also viewed porn. And what
You
we're
say
seeing is
80% of young women also?
82%. Yeah. And
82,
the
yeah.
age of viewing continues to drop. So they're getting younger and younger as they're doing these polls. And by this 2017 poll, 69% of the males and 23% of the females viewed porn at 13 or younger. And so before they've even been exposed to a real life partner or even started dating, they were exposed to sex in this way through porn. And we're seeing it's really creating an impact.
Give that statistic again. Now you're saying there's a certain percentage of people at age 13 or 14 or younger. Repeat that one if you would, please.
Yeah, the age of viewing when they started to view porn continues to drop. And so in this
Yeah.
specific poll, 69% of the males said they started to engage with porn at age 13 or younger.
Yeah. Okay. Wow.
And so we're seeing the younger that it starts, the more it just really impacts the developing brain and also sexual conditioning.
And Tyann, before we go further, let's see if we can't define what pornography addiction is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so what we're seeing is addiction across the board usually has just three similar aspects. And in addictions training, we talk about the three C's. And so you may notice just a craving process. I feel like I need that. I have an urge to go towards it. So that's one of the C's, is a craving. The second C is control. There's a sense of a loss of control because it starts to impact the frontal lobe. Their sense of willpower, their impulse control starts to be impacted by it. So it may feel like I'm spending a lot more time with this than I actually want to. It's impacting how I actually want to live my life. So a loss of control around that. And then the third C is it starts to have consequences, but I continue. So the consequences for the couples that I'm working with is my spouse is feeling hurt. There's actually less time for connection because I'm engaging with the screen, or I'm engaging with these figures in the porn instead of connecting with my wife. And by the time they've come to me for couples therapy, there's been a great disconnect. And they get to a space where there may be spaces of minimizing, but more often than not, it's I can't stop, even though I really want to, even though there's been attempts.
And when you're saying there's increasing disconnect, is that uh, sexually only, or in intimacy, caring, and closeness in general?
Yeah, so we actually see porn use when it becomes addictive and problematic. It actually impacts their relationship satisfaction and sexual satisfaction. And so, in a lot of studies, they're seeing people who then compulsively engage with porn find their partners less attractive because there may be a comparison with the porn figures versus their partner. There's just a decrease in satisfaction in connection as well, because what we see is through sexual conditioning, they may get more arousal through a screen and novelty and variety from porn versus just connection with their partner. And so there's a decrease in closeness and connection in the relationship, and a decrease in just satisfaction in sex with the partner as well when porn use becomes problematic for the couple. And what's fascinating too is once we see abstinence from porn use, even just within just 3 weeks, relationship satisfaction starts to improve again, as well as sexual satisfaction within the relationship too. So that can be pretty powerful for them to know and to be aware of that.
If you could repeat that also, I think you were saying that in several weeks of abstinence, then the attraction to the partner and both sexually and interpersonally increases fairly quickly. Is that correct?
Yeah, just within 3 weeks for many of them of abstinence. And then they're doing the research on where's your relationship satisfaction now? Where's your sexual satisfaction now? It starts to improve within just 3 weeks of abstinence from porn use.
I imagine if they're engaging in a porn addiction is different than, just occasionally looking at pornography, and that like you said, well, you didn't use the word compulsive behavior, but the inability to stop viewing pornography can also impact the relationship because it sets unrealistic expectations for the sexual experiences that they're having with their partner.
Oh yes, absolutely. It just changes things. It's they call it sexual conditioning because it's just a different way that the brain starts to get aroused. And imagine like a person who's never had a sexual relationship. And so like a teen that's engaging with sex for the first time through porn and masturbation, what conditions them for arousal is actually a screen, right? Is actually just the act of masturbation. And they don't then have attraction to real life partners. There's been some stories in the trainings where a person first exposure to sex is through porn, and then they may have met somebody and there's less attraction to that partner, and then we may even see porn induced ED or erectile dysfunction, where it could be a whole year with their new partner where they actually can't engage in sex, even if they wanted to, because of this porn induced erectile dysfunction. Their brain has been socialized and sexually conditioned to be aroused by the screen, to be aroused by porn, and less so by a real life partner. They don't even know how to engage, even if they wanted to.
Is that related to what used to be talked about, and perhaps still is, maybe the same or different, but the Madonna whore kind of problem that the male being attracted to the whore, but not to the loving woman. So, like the ability, the sexual drive is directed toward someone with a more kind of a wild side, you might say, and not feeling excitement from
Mhm.
someone that who in a more loving way.
Yeah, I think that's a good example of just sexual conditioning and arousal. And so what they're seeing is even if they paired porn with a non-sexy object, like porn in a black boot, porn in a jar of pennies, ultimately they then just see the black boot and then they get aroused or get an erection. And so we're just talking about sexual conditioning. This is what they've been exposed to, how exciting it is for the first time when they're viewing porn. And then the conditioning is to the screen. The conditioning is to this act of masturbation instead of engaging with a real life person. And any conditioning can then actually be unconditioned.
And you said pretty quickly within 3 weeks
For some people,
for
yeah.
some people.
So
Hmm.
that's for people with, oh, now my relationship satisfaction and sexual satisfaction can increase and improve again. So
Hmm.
this is different from a fetish. So when they talk about porn induced sexual conditioning, we can see, is it an actual part of your sexual identity, or is it porn induced after abstinence? Because if it's porn induced, after abstinence, they see that their sexual taste then goes back to a certain level that's different. If it's an actual fetish that's part of their sexual identity, then it'll continue, right? But if it's porn induced after abstinence, they actually heal a lot of that sexual conditioning. And for young men who've never had a relationship and their arousal has been then sexually conditioned to the screen and to porn, it's actually then really important to do some exposure with not even going straight to trying to have sex with a woman, but actual just intimacy, connection with a human body, touching someone, hugging someone.
Like Masters and Johnson, the approach that they
Mm,
use for human sexual dysfunction, say the woman might guide his hand over her body, but they're not allowed to have
mm.
intercourse, but learn to touch each other in a loving way, and things of that nature.
Yeah, absolutely. So they can have intercourse if they choose to go towards that. But what we see is essential for recovery, especially for young men who've never had a relationship, is just conditioning towards a real human.
Yeah, it sounds like if someone is engaging in porn in the way that becomes an addiction, then they're losing the ability to develop social skills. Like, how do you even talk to somebody? How do you begin a conversation? Like, how do you even make eye contact with someone? And all those skills might need to be relearned or learned for the first time.
Exactly.
Now, we usually think of porn addiction as a problem of man, but I think I can recall a patient that I treated in Philadelphia who had had sexual abuse from an older man when she was a little girl, and she said she actually enjoyed it, and then later in life, she got married to this fellow who was very muscular, hunky guy, uh, and uh, and she found, she just couldn't get sexual arousal from him, so she started having affairs with sleazy guys. And the day before she saw me for the first time, somebody referred her to me. She said she stood at the mirror with a razor blade to her neck, saying, "Should I slit my throat or go ahead and have that session with Dr. Burns tomorrow?" And fortunately, she came, but she was very ashamed of herself, and she had never revealed any of these issues to her husband, and and she was able to work through it in a pretty fantastic way in the therapy. But I was just wondering if, and you may or may not know this, but to what percentage of the time is it a fellow who's got this issue, the kind of problems you're describing, and to what, how often would it be a woman who's affected by a porn addiction and having a negative impact on her life?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think what we see in terms of sexual function is just because the parts are different. And so for the male having erectile dysfunction, they're just more greatly impacted by the porn use because of that. But definitely see sex addiction in women and
Mm-hmm.
it really impacting them. All of those aspects that we're talking about, right? Like loss of control, living a life that doesn't align with their values. There's a craving or a seeking for this thing that feels like a need for them. And then there's negative consequences. Dr. Patrick Carnes actually shares a lot of cases around women. He worked with a musician who was a woman. And also, there nightly after her performances, she would seek out someone in the audience and take them home to engage in intercourse and then just send them on their way. And despite it feeling very disturbing to her, the next day it just feels like that became a nightly routine where
Yeah.
there's the craving or the need for it. The consequences of it was dangerous sometimes. She didn't even know the
Oh, yeah.
person. Stole her wallet. A person that she took home stole her wallet, but continued. So, definitely a lot of documentation in that for women as well. Yeah. They even see possibly prostitution could be an aspect of um, sex addiction, but also a survival aspect. And then it's really complicated with sexual abuse as well, having been objectified. It's very normal for victims of sexual abuse to feel arousal and pleasure because you're just dealing with sex. That's just how your body responds. And from that, a lot of times they internalize blame or they internalize that, oh, I wanted it, or that was, my fault that my body responded in this way. But that's just a natural human response. It doesn't mean
Or maybe I
that
wasn't
you were
even.
victimized.
Hmm. Exactly. Sorry, I interrupted you, Tanya.
No, no, you're good. Yeah. Yeah, what were you saying, Rhonda?
Well, that maybe they start having the belief that they weren't, a victim of a molestation or an assault
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah,
they responded sexually with arousal.
absolutely. Yeah. And they were absolutely still a victim of sexual abuse. And a lot of times we see also healing a lot of that trauma can then impact just a healthier response to how they treat their body, how they engage with another person, how they engage in intimacy again for the first time. Right. So, yeah. Sounds like that was the case that you had worked with as well, Dr. Burns. Just sounds like through the healing work, then she was able to re-engage with her partner, or just not seek out kind of these more sleazy guys, right? Because you said there is a lot of healing through that. And I see that too in just working with trauma. There's just so much violation and pain, and how you associate with your body, violation of trust, objectifying your own body becomes the norm. And so healing from the trauma, we see healing in all of that. I can trust again. I can feel safe in my body again. I can get more mindful in my body and connecting sexually instead of dissociating, which often happens a lot for trauma victims. And so, yeah, it's very powerful in healing from trauma. You heal your sense of safety within your own body too.
And so, Tyann, when this becomes an issue for a couple and you decide to work with the person individually, how do you incorporate team structure and the team methods and into your work?
Yeah. First, I want to share with them a lot of psychoeducation. I think that piece is really important just so they have awareness, because even now, I think there's a lot of minimizing of the issue. There's even still some controversy of like, can porn be an addiction? And so just giving them education, for some it's not, and for others it absolutely is, and greatly impacted their lives. And so the first piece I want to share with them is just awareness of porn's impact on the brain. And if it feels okay with you all, maybe I could review that and then I'll go through some of the tools as well.
Absolutely love that.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So we see just these main 4 ways that the brain is impacted. So first is that sensitization. Sorry, couldn't say that word. Where it just gets more sensitive. There's more of a craving. So the brain kicks into wanting more, chasing more, needing to go towards it again and again. So getting sensitized, right? And then there's a
Getting
desensitization.
desensitized. Is that it right? Did I use the right
First,
word?
sensitization. Sensitization is just more cravings. I feel like I want more of it. I have to have more of it. It feels even
Yeah.
more, for
Yeah.
sometimes it's like a life or death thing. I have to have it.
Yeah.
And then there is a desensitization where the reward system can just get worn out. And so we see tolerance, right? I need more of it in order to get the same effect. And this is where we start to see for them, they may start to get bored with certain porn, and then they have to get to more extreme porn in order to get the same effect. So it's not even just more time with porn, it gets more extreme. Their sexual taste starts to morph. And so some of the guys that I've worked with feel a lot of shame about this, and they didn't even realize that was not a part of them or who they are. Some of them actually start to get really disturbed as to how their porn taste starts to morph, where it gets more extreme. They then may need like more violence in the porn. And what we see is like when they start younger, the younger that they start, I have one that even started at 10 years old. The younger that they start, the more extreme by the time they get help that their porn is. So they may get into more of like bestiality, so sex with animals, or just disturbing content. And that's because of desensitization. I'm still needing to chase that high. And in the addictions world, they see sensitization and desensitization as I need more. So more want, less like. More want. I want more. I have to have more, but I actually like it less. And then I need more extreme content in order to get the same effect. So I just want them to be aware of that and to really normalize that, because there's a lot of shame. And there's even confusion for people because they're needing more extreme content. They may go into more like same-sex porn, and then they wonder like, oh my gosh, am I gay? Am I not? And through abstinence, they then can actually explore, oh, was this due to desensitization, where my sexual taste has just morphed? And after abstinence, it does actually go back to baseline. I don't need that extreme content anymore for arousal. And then I can actually know, am I struggling with sexuality and exploring that, or was it just the morphing of the porn taste, right? So letting them know those two elements. And then just the other two ways that addiction affects our brain is it affects your frontal lobe. So it becomes harder to quit, feels harder to control. I become hyper reactive to addiction cues. So I may even just see something on social media and then it pulls me back in because it then starts to affect your frontal lobe and your ability to have control over it. And then the fourth way that addiction impacts our brain is it starts to impact our stress system and it feels like it starts to malfunction. A minor stress can create a severe craving. So they may have had like a poor grade in a class and it can trigger a severe craving to go towards that content. And then what's really important in this malfunctioning stress system is not only does a little bit of stress trigger really severe cravings for them, but we'll see severe withdrawal symptoms, which people didn't realize for a long time could impact porn use. So when they try to stop, they need to know that these symptoms can come up just so they could be aware. Because these are the symptoms that can drive them right back to porn use because it feels like, oh, that's the only thing that can help me feel normal again. So the withdrawal symptoms that are really common, that you've actually already touched on some, Rhonda, is they talk about having like a social paralysis. I'm just feeling kind of stunted in my social connection, but just a decrease in mood, a decrease in pleasure. And so we're not just seeing a decrease in pleasure, less liking of the porn content. There's a decrease in pleasure in just life in general. It's almost like that reward system has been exhausted. And so even everyday things that they used to enjoy, like socialization, watching a movie, having a conversation with a loved one, there's just a decreased pleasure in that. It just feels blah for them. Mainly through the research, they see dopamine and with dopamine producing nerve cells really shrinking from the use of meth, cocaine, and also porn. Porn and sex addiction seems to impact that. And so
So brain shrinks. Is that what you're saying?
dopamine producing nerve cells seems to shrink with these three, with meth, cocaine, and then sex addiction seems to create that same impact.
Mm.
And so the protein that's tied to dopamine that they call delta phosphate, these are like, so the dopamine motivates you to go towards pleasure. And delta phosphate are like the workers that work really hard to make sure you remember the pleasure and it tells you to do it again and it drives the urges. And so after abstinence, we see like the protein of that delta phosphate really drop because then you no longer have that protein that tells you to do it again, and really drive the urge in that process. So it's really fascinating to see that. And one withdrawal symptom that is unique that you don't see in meth and drug use and cocaine use is what they call flatlining, where they call that even like lifeless genitals. And that's really terrifying for a lot of them who stop because it's like, oh my gosh, am I just going to have like zero sex drive? And I'm gonna flatline, and they call it just lifeless genitals because it feels like I have no attraction, I have no arousal, and it just feels like this deadening effect. And that is one that is really important to let them know about because if they feel like, oh, this will never heal, and it always does, they see for some it can be as short as 3 weeks. For some, they need about 4 months. So depending on severity of use, how early they started, they just need to be aware of flatlining because that will drive them back to seeking porn just so they can have some sense of life in their system again, right?
And is that flatlining, that's just from porn use or just from methadone or any kind of drug? Is that right, or am I
They see
getting it
that to be
wrong?
really unique to porn use,
Oh,
this
that's unique to
flatlining.
porn use, the
Yeah, like,
flatlining.
yeah. Don't really see it in withdrawal symptoms of drugs. Don't really see it in withdrawal symptoms of like alcohol. But withdrawing from porn use initially seems to flatline them. And recovery is typically around 7 weeks of complete abstinence. But for some, it can take up to 4 months, and they just really need to be aware of that because you can imagine how scary that is for someone who feels like, oh, am I just going to have like no arousal or response and just have this deadening kind of effect?
So that would be important psychoeducational information for people who are trying to
Mhm.
withdraw so they don't go into that state of hopelessness, which and
Exactly.
then drive them back to porn use. This is my only way of getting any kind of sexual arousal or excitement.
Hmm.
Is that right? Am I
Exactly.
reading that right?
Yeah, exactly. I feel like that's so important for awareness when you talk about
Mm.
hopelessness, preparing them for that. Because many just, this isn't common knowledge. And
Yeah.
porn use is so common that it feels like it's just a thing that people do. But when it becomes a problem, it can become really serious. And for them to
Yeah.
know that, hey, this can come up when you're trying to stop. Like you wanted to engage in it for pleasure, for enjoyment, and then ultimately it seems to deplete that, right? It's really sad when you get into a space of loss of pleasure. Anhedonia is just a loss of sense of pleasure in life, not just with the porn, but things you've loved, like connection and movies and um, just living. But for them to know that that all gets better as well with
Now,
abstinence.
I would think that the one early step is the issue of motivation, and you can't just assume that someone's going to want to give up any kind of addiction because they want to be good or something like that, and the reason they're in it is because they're very much committed to this habit. And I can imagine that it might be that many, if not most people, aren't going to be motivated to let go of that. How do you handle that? And that because that seems to be a very overpowering dimension that if it's not dealt with in some way, the powerful way, then any attempts to are going to be doomed to failure, I would think.
Yeah, I think this is a great transition into looking at the tools and how Team CBT just really has powerful ways of addressing motivation. Because we know in the addiction world, they talk about motivational interviewing, which is great, looking at the pros and cons of change. But I feel like the paradox that you've created, Dr. Burns, where we're not even talking about the cons of the, that we're not talking about the cost of the habit. They're already really aware of that, right? So when we use team, of course, we first empathize and connect and create a safe place with them. Dr. Burns also has an urges and cravings scale that's mainly for drugs and alcohol. But we could just even really replace that with porn use. It's the same thing. And just measuring, right? How strong are the cravings this week? 0 to 100. How strong are your urges to follow through? I love what you've outlined when we're doing measurement as well, Dr. Burns, on if we just normalize cravings first, they're much more likely to be more forthcoming about actual relapse and urges and engaging. So if we normalize cravings and address first, how strong have your cravings been 0 to 100 in the past week to use? Then they're much more likely to say, okay, the cravings were strong. And then we rate how strong were your urges. Were there relapses? Did you actually act and engage in porn use or drugs? Then they're more likely to be forthcoming about the actual relapse too. And then addressing motivation. I mean, the triple paradox, I feel like, is the most powerful motivational tool because it's completely paradoxical. We're first honoring what is the benefit of continuing to engage in porn use, because when they come in, there's lots of shame. Just from the couples, I don't have extensive experience, but from the few couples that I've worked with, it's often more of the problem for the spouse, where
Yeah,
she's
of course.
complaining, feeling betrayed, feeling hurt. And so I feel like it really decreases shame when we use the triple paradox, where we're just aligning with right now, what does it actually do for you? And I actually like to do this with the partner there, just so she can really be aware of what function is this porn use serving for them. So they'll learn more layers of like, it actually helps me to decrease stress. Moments when I'm lonely, I feel a sense of connection. Moments when you're upset with me and we're disconnecting, I feel like this is a reliable friend who won't get mad at me, who won't reject me. And there's actually a lot of depth to the function of it when we look at the triple paradox and the benefits of the porn use. A sense of connection, a sense of companionship. This is actually what they're looking for. It's not just a pleasure thing for masturbation, right? Because initially it feels like, oh, it's just this shallow thing. But yeah, the triple paradox of just honoring the benefits, connecting with the values, where they're kind of in shock. Oh, there's values behind this. The values is actually finding some relief, finding some connection, having a sense of self-care in a moment when I'm really stressed out and overwhelmed with life. This is a moment of just getting some sense of relief.
I love what you're saying. Do you ever use the decision-making tool?
In terms of motivation to change, of do you want to
Yeah,
stop or not? I don't use as much of the decision-making tool, because I find like the triple paradox, and then when you do voicing the resistance, I
yeah,
just rate their motivation for change. And so initially
yeah,
they may say motivation for change is 90. My wife is about to leave me. And then we go through the benefits and the values and then the cost of change, not the cost of the porn use, which is typical
yeah.
motivational interviewing, but the cost of change is then they know, oh, flatlining, it's challenging. I'll have to really
Oh, yeah,
create
right.
changes in my environment. I have to grieve. I have to let go of this friend that's been reliable for me. Then I re-rate motivation for change, and then they could probably connect with my motivations now like 50%, maybe even
Yeah,
40, right? And then once we voice the resistance, or I think you call it also externalization of resistance, Dr.
yeah,
Brown.
right. Uh-huh.
Once
Yeah,
we do that, they start to take on a voice of change if that motivation is there. Like, why change considering this has been your reliable friend? Why change when it brings pleasure easily and quickly? You won't get rejected. Like, your wife won't tell you. I mean, your wife will tell you no, but porn won't tell you no, right? And then they could take on the voice of change of like, well, yeah, it is an easy source of pleasure and it does help with loneliness, but you know what? I'm super lonely right now because I'm disconnected from my wife. I don't even enjoy movies and things I used to enjoy because this has been consuming. And once they start to take on that voice of change, and I also connect with their values of change, why is it important to you to then actually connect with your wife? Why is it important to you to actually connect with conversations and movies versus porn? Then I re-rate the motivation to change after we do voicing the resistance or externalization of resistance. And to me, that's the decision making form, because once they can take on that voice of change, for some of them, they may not want to change. I haven't encountered that yet. I have with other addictions like shopping and other things. For some, they're like, "Oh, I'm at 20%. I actually don't want to change. This serves me." But with the porn and the few couples that I've worked with, their motivation to change like goes to way past that 40 or 50, 90, 100. I've had one that said 150. I want
Mm.
a real connection versus a synthetic connection with this thing. Um, and so
Why
I
do they
feel like
want that?
that, huh?
Why do they want that?
Why do they want a real connection?
Yeah,
Yeah, because they'll connect with things like, my wife really matters to me. I want a partnership where we're actually talking about our problems instead of me escaping into using porn when I'm lonely or disconnected from her. And so they'll connect with their values, and the whys is my partner's really important to me. I want a stronger marriage. I want to build a foundation, an example for our children of how we talk through hardships versus running away from it. So that externalization of resistance becomes really powerful, just connecting with their values and their motivation for change. And I turn that into a script. It becomes a motivation script for them to look at when they're struggling. Because if it can boost their motivation during our session, it's when they're triggered, it can boost their motivation again. And some read that religiously.
So I can imagine then that a strong part of the motivation for change would be a strong desire to maintain this marriage and this relationship.
And two, I don't like quality of life, because when it gets into the space of compulsivity and addiction, they've lost engagement with life, like joy in conversations, joy in the little things. And they talk about after abstinence and recovery, even like how just going for a walk, once they get that sense of pleasure back and the healing, it's like, oh my gosh, going for a walk, I'm feeling actually such connection with life. Or the first time I'm actually having a sexual connection with my wife without porn, it feels
Mm-hmm.
like the connection and just the sensations felt so much more powerful for them.
What is the role of groups like Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous,
Mhm.
in maybe in conjunction
Mhm.
with getting the therapy for an individual or therapy as a
Mhm.
couple? Would there also be a role for some people in a group like that?
Yeah, I think social support is a really important piece of recovery. For a lot of porn use and addiction, there's forums. So one of the websites, one of the just a really great book that pulls it all together is Your Brain on Porn. And the website is that same title, yourbrainonporn.com, has forums where they can actually connect. And just getting on that, like I saw someone post, like, okay, I'm getting started on my journey. And then all of these people came in and said, dude, you can do this. It's worth it. It's support. I think it's wonderful. It's not for everyone. So, like a 12-step group may be wonderful for one person, but not others. And so I think it's all part of that problem solution, which is another tool that Dr. Burns has put
Yeah.
together. This is a problem that I can encounter. I can be aware of my triggers. For example, as people are tracking their triggers, they're not aware. Like one guy I worked with is when my wife leaves and I hear that door slam, that was like an automatic trigger of wanting to go
Yeah,
straight to
sure.
porn. And then
Yeah.
what would be the solution? That then we can come up with connecting with a support group, doing something else. I also leave the house. And then with problem solution, I also want them, I've added the element of rate how effective is this solution for that problem, 0 to 100. Because it sounded like a good solution, but they rate it at like 50. Then they need additional
Oh, yeah.
solutions that could be more powerful.
And Tyann, are you also using the habit and addiction log and then the devil's advocate technique? Or is that working with porn addiction too?
I have not used as much of the habits and addiction log in just um, once we've gone through the motivation. Once we look at triggers, it seems like the motivational work has really helped with just a lot of that awareness. And so, what I've really liked is looking more of like those behavioral interventions that Dr. Burns has had. So, like stimulus control, we're seeing like moving the furniture around, just changing the room, changing the environment, changing the chair that they're familiar with, has been really helpful. So, stimulus control, porn and ad blockers, eliminating any artificial sexual stimulation. And so, if they're surfing pictures still, they're reading erotic literature, they're looking at underwear ads, all of that can still be quite stimulating and draw them back into the habit. And so stimulus control, those behavioral interventions seems to be quite important in the recovery aspect. And then with stimulus control, I also like to add not just stopping, because stimulus control can feel very depriving, right, for them, which is one of the cost of change. I'm going to feel deprived. I'm going to miss this thing that's been there for me. It's also then really important to look at, once you remove that thing that's been there for you and served this function of a pleasure, connection, escapism, what will you replace it with? What will you do instead? And it's really important to steer their brain towards activities that produce lasting, sustainable satisfaction, even if it's not quite immediately rewarding. So with stimulus control, we need to ask the question, and what will you do instead? Because just letting go or stopping, it then just feels like I'm in the space of loss. But then what can you add to your life that you could be really proud of, that could drive longer term satisfaction, longer term just really sense of pride in yourself, right? So some of the guys come up with, I could actually go out and a garden, build something from scratch, actually have a good conversation, call up a friend that I haven't, go visit my mom who I haven't in a while. And so just these things that just produce longer lasting effects that just really helps them to feel proud of themselves and aligns with their values. It seems really important.
To what extent is it ever part of the solution that the couple decide to engage in pornographic activities together, or go to sex parties and things where various fantasies are acted out? And I understand there's quite a world of, not my neighborhood, I don't think, but that
You'd be
a lot
surprised.
of yeah, it could be absolutely. And would that all ever be considered a positive, healthy outcome if that
Mhm.
works for a couple, or does
Yeah.
abstinence the only desirable outcome? Um,
Hmm. To heal from these impacts of the porn addiction, they're finding that abstinence is really important. Now, what you're talking about with, if they and their partner just have a certain sexual identity or practice and it's not a problem, I just check with the person and the couple. Is it a problem for you? If it's not a
right.
problem, go for it, right? Engage
Yeah.
in whatever parties that's part of your own sexual identity that works for you. If it's not a problem for you, go for it. If there's consensual partners and whatever else, I'm all in support of whatever works for people can be a part of their own healthy sex life.
Yeah, that was
Um,
actually a solution for the couple. For the woman I was working with in Philadelphia, she eventually decided to have her husband join the therapy, work with them as a couple, and then she disclosed to him, the activity she'd been involved in, and how awful, she felt. And he was devastated at first because he had no idea, but he hung in there. And then I had them working as a couple, and they would have a clipboard and a daily mood log uh,
mhm.
as one of their sexual tools. And whenever she would get anxious, she would raise her hand, and then they'd pick up
Mm.
the daily mood log and write down her negative thoughts. And that was very helpful and reassuring. And then they came back the next week and said, "We think we're cured now." and, and so I never saw them again, but ran into her about, I don't know, 6 or 7 years later. I was at the local farmers markets with my kids. We used to go to this place and get these great sausage sandwiches. I can't remember the name, but it was out on the main line, and they were just to die for. And we'd gotten our sausage sandwiches and ate there And then this woman came up with a baby in a stroller, and one baby walking along next to her, another one attached to her shoulder or something like that. And she said, do you remember me? And I said, oh, yeah, how could I ever forget? And she said, well, as you can see, your therapy was very effective. And so that was kind of a heartwarming, and she had been suffering so much at the beginning of therapy. It was a beautiful thing to see them finding a loving relationship. And I guess that's part of what you're maneuvering too with the couples you're treating, and you're
Mhm.
seeing that type of thing a fair amount from based on what you're saying.
Right. And then you could see then they're connecting with real life people. I could imagine that could be actually really helpful. And for me, it's just whatever works for them and works for the couple. Like there's no
Yeah.
one right way to have a sexual identity. I worked with a man who was dissatisfied in his relationship as a traditional couple, and they decided to become a throuple, where they pulled in another partner into the mix, and it was all consensual. It worked great for them, and there was just improved satisfaction for both. And so, if it's a part of their own healthy sexual identity among consensual partners, I think that's great. Like, go for it. When it's a
So,
problem, that's when we can give them tools to address this. That's
so the
exactly right.
goal is being helpful if there's a problem in their marriage, in their relationship.
Mhm.
And the goal is not, of a Puritan nature of there's right and wrong ways to have a
Exactly.
sexual life or a sexual identity or sexual
Right.
fantasies.
Yeah. Truly no shaming of their own sexual identity, and even no shaming when the porn has become a problem, right? Because we, through the triple paradox, we could see when it wasn't a problem and it served a really important function and was even helpful for them. But now that it's become a problem and they're expressing they want the change, then we have the tools to really walk us alongside them to create the life that they really do want.
Are you seeing a lot of this problem? And if people are in Oklahoma City, where your practice is, should they? We can put in the show notes where they can get a hold of you. But are you seeing quite a lot of this type of thing now? Are you getting a reputation for specializing in this?
I do specialize in working with couples. It has shown up more frequently for me in the past year, which is interesting. And that was why I started to really dive into learning more and understanding more specifically about porn addiction and its impacts. Um, so, yeah, I do specialize in working with couples. I don't specialize in working with couples with sex addiction or porn addiction. It just happened, like it came up. And then my interest is always about, like, let me learn more just so I can be the most effective in helping them.
Well, I can imagine too. How many therapists in the world do you think are using the techniques you've outlined on porn addiction? You might be the only one.
Yeah. Because I just love the team habits and addiction model, I don't see anything that's as effective, just like addressing motivation alone,
Yeah, right.
and just the way that uh,
Motivation is the huge issue, the huge barrier,
mhm,
and and
it's the
without,
key.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
right. And without the motivation and the resistance addressed, all the techniques in the world are going to fail. And
exactly.
once it's addressed, none of the techniques in the world will be necessary.
Mhm.
I mean, I've seen that too, where once somebody has, okay, this, I want to lose weight or I want to do this or that. Do you need help with that? Just say, no, I know how to do that. Like the barrier is the motivational piece. So it's really neat to see you're
Mhm.
doing that. And then if there, I know you do a lot of teaching too, and I want to make sure if there's people who want to learn from you. I'm always running into therapists who have worked with you in some capacity I don't know if getting therapy, I know getting consultation and teaching. And so people are constantly raving about Tyann as a teacher too. And what kind of courses and classes or counseling or supervision are you offering for mental health professionals who may be listening and saying, well, this is someone I would really like to work with and learn from? What do you have classes in this type
Yeah.
of thing, or individual supervision, or how is it working these days?
Yeah, that's so kind. Thank you for bringing that up, Dr. Burns. I do really enjoy one-on-one training for sure. So I do Team CBT consultations, and I reserve all of Thursdays for one-on-one Team CBT consultations. And then I'm wanting to start a practice group on Thursday mornings as well, of just implementing the team structure and processes and some other tools that I've learned. To treat just a variety of struggles as well. So,
Well, give me the data on those things, and I'll certainly put them in the show notes. And if you are a therapist looking for help with team CBT in general with an expert, and you want some one-on-one consultation, I would strongly recommend Tyann. I did a lot of individual consultation when I was learning CBT. And just even with a couple of patients I was stuck with and see how to get unstuck, it was such a great learning thing and helped me tremendously. And now even I've reinstituted my Sunday hikes again, and therapists come and we do difficult case consultations all the time, and it's really, really helpful. And I think you can't emphasize that enough. And then at Thursday AM, a practice group would be like how many hours? 2 hours or an hour and a half or
an hour and a half was what was voted for. So I'm going to try to keep it to that.
and so they would be practicing one technique per group, like the problem solution list or the triple paradox. Is that how you work it?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking for now. It'll continue to evolve, but
Yeah.
I'm thinking possibly like there would be a tool that new team therapists can practice, like the double standard, but
Oh,
their
yeah.
team therapists who are familiar with
Basics.
that can have another option. So there may be like two practice sheets, one for
Yeah.
someone newer to it and one for someone who just wants to try a different tool.
That's what we've done with our Tuesday group, and but
Oh,
we
really?
had 12-week practice groups for newbies, and then they can merge with the big group. But in January, we're going to just start the advanced group with the basics again and go right through the model, because it just seems like the so-called advanced people still don't understand a lot of the basics,
Oh,
testing,
that's
5
interesting.
secrets for empathy, and how to melt away resistance. I think it's such a challenging model to learn.
Yeah.
And so, in case people don't read the show notes, Tyann, can you say what your website is so that people can go to it?
Yeah, my training website is teamcbttraining.com.
So that's TEAMCBT training, TRAINING.com.
Yep, exactly.
And just for those who are hard of hearing or short on memory, that's Team CBT Training, all one word, TEAM CBT Training, TRAINING.com. And then you'll
Mhm.
find Tyann and her wonderful website and all kinds of offerings there, I'm sure. And anything you sign up for, I think you're going to be glad that you did.
Yeah, I definitely want to emphasize that. Tyann is an incredible trainer. I've been in many of her classes and learned something every time. And you're just really a magnificent trainer, Tyann, as people could tell from this podcast.
Thank you so much to both of you and for letting me be here to share some of my passions because
Yeah, you're welcome
ultimately it's about helping people.
anytime. You're one of our favorite guests. You and Matt May, I think, are some of our favorites.
Oh, I'm so honored to even be in the same vicinity with Matt May, the greatest therapist in the universe. So
Yeah.